There was a time in my life when poetry seemed a strange thing. It was a little bit metaphorical, a little bit rhyming, and a little bit rhythmic, and a lot bit confusing. How was I supposed to know what that poet meant? How does a poem about chickens have anything to do with my life? But when I started reading Shakespeare, I began to understand a little more about flow and meter. And when I started needing to decipher and dissect, I started to like those sounds and the feelings I found when I began to understand. Back then, I thought that poems were supposed to rhyme, even if only ever a few lines. I saw poetry as a tightly structured thing that could be understood with close scrutiny, but was less about creative expression than meeting the parameters of an assignment. In school, I would get grades on my poetry, the same way I would get grades on my math test. But poetry and literature aren't yes or no questions. There isn't a right answer, and it's as silly to grade poetry as it is to grade artwork. Although I also got grades on my artwork too, to my outrage. I vividly remember arguing with my teacher about a poem by Emily Dickinson. I don't remember which one. Let's assume that it's the one we heard earlier. I just understood her poem to mean one thing, and the teacher argued with me that it meant something else. And we kept going back and forth until I said, almost shouting, "We can't know what she meant because she's dead." I don't remember what grade I got on that assignment, but if I was the teacher, I would have been proud of my student for being so perceptive and so passionate about poetry. Around that time, I started to understand that art is not about what the creator intended or what they believe it means, because once it's out there being experienced, the audience can make whatever meaning they can. The artist puts their art out into the world to be experienced with no assurance that they'll be understood. Poets put their poetry out into the world hoping to stir hearts, and there's nothing they can do if it doesn't. We, as people, taking in the art, get to choose the meaning we find there. And sure, we can make more meaning if we hear from the creator of that what it is they were trying to tell us, but we don't get to know ever if we understand it right. Mainly because there's no such thing as right and wrong in creativity. There are no letter grades that aren't the opinion of that individual. As a creator of sermons, it's so interesting to hear what people take from them. Often it's close to what I hoped they would take, but often they go in another direction and, wow, that's interesting, I didn't think of that. And sometimes they hear the opposite of what I said. Can't help it. I'm fine with it because really, if someone can think of something to say to me about my message beyond "thank you for your talk," then I think they understood something, and that's the goal. I think it's enough to know that I touched someone in an important way. There's magic in the interchange of ideas between the words themselves and what they mean to another person. There is magic and power in words, as illustrated in the poem Tattoo. The young man who's marking his flesh with a symbol for the name of a beloved, not yet understanding that a name and our relationship to that name doesn't last forever. And how we can't explain to the girl who watched in the mirror as the tattoo artist stitched the word for her father's name across her back that words aren't made of flesh and blood and they don't bite the skin, because they do bite and they are made of the body once they are on the body. Language is the animal we've trained to pick up the scent of meaning, says the poet. Language is the animal, and we are the person directing the dog. Do we use it to attack or to share love? Todd Davis, the poet who wrote Tattoo, shared a little bit about what inspired him around poetry. This is us learning a little more to make a little more meaning. I loved poetry growing up, he said. My dad would read Keats and Wordsworth and Frost to us at the dinner table, but I didn't think I could write it until I read Maxine Kumin's The Excrement poem. As the son of a veterinarian, I wasn't exactly sure what poems were made of, but what was acceptable for us to write about and what wasn't. But Kumin showed me that all my years of cleaning poop from kennel floors was worth something. That poems are part of the body, and the body doesn't know the difference between the sacred and the profane. Mary Oliver, poet beloved by Unitarian Universalists because of her amazing earth and spiritual-centered poems, wrote this about poetry. I believe poetry is very old. It is sacred. It wishes for community. It is a community ritual, certainly. And that's why when you write a poem, you write it for anybody and everybody. It's a gift to yourself, but it's a gift to anyone who has a hunger for it. Poems mean something more than the words on the pages, just as Adina said. They are more than that. Poems make meaning. They help us to create meanings out of things when we hunger for it, of moments that we experience and don't know how to process, of times when love is lost to us and beyond us, of joy that is more than anyone can bear. Poetry is more than a set of words on a page. It is thinking symbolically. It's using metaphor the way an artist uses a paintbrush with skill and subtlety. Poetry ties a string to our hearts and leads us towards one another. Poetic language moves us. It moves us to tears. It moves us to action. Poetic language helps us to make meaning. It can spark within us the desire to change the world. It can spark more than statistics can. Not that the statistics don't move us, but we often need them translated for us into graphs, simple art that makes meaning of the data. And graphs don't always move us, but if someone makes meaning of them, makes poetry of the data, we begin to be moved by the numbers. So here's some data for you. Over the last 10 years, the oceans have heated 0.21 degrees. Okay, let's make some sense of this data. The last 10 years were the ocean's warmest decade since the 1800s. And here's the poetic meaning made of that data by Alexis Pauline Gumbs. I wanted to write a poem about how extreme heat of the ocean is breaking my heart, but the whales beat me to it. In late July, almost 100 longfin pilot whales left the deep, usually cold waters where they live, and collectively stranded themselves upon the shore. As soon as they lost the support of the water, their chest walls crushed their internal organs. They literally broke their hearts. Which language moves you more? The numbers telling of the ocean's rising temperatures, the descriptions of the whales breaking their own hearts. So how does poetry shape us? It moves us, it touches our hearts and minds in ways that nothing else can. Poetry, art, music, dance, drama, these are the things that move us, would help us to process and learn and understand what the world is, what it's for, what we're here for. We can then move through the world with compassion. These creative expressions are how we deal with the confusing things that come our way, how we express the feelings that are the only tools we have. Feelings are the only tools we have to honestly communicate with one another. Many folks in this room are musical. Many are theatrical. Many create art in different forms. How many of you are poets? I see some hands. If you're looking for ways to express yourself in words, you want to read some examples, I have lots of suggestions for you. I love the Rattle poetry magazine because the poems and poets are contemporary meaning makers, folks who respond to current events in a Poets Respond series, folks who share intimate moments in their own lives, young poets, children, teenagers making poetry to express themselves. They even have a monthly challenge where you can write a poem on an image that is selected for that month. I also love the Poetry Foundation. They share classic poems and poems from famous poets we all know, Naomi Shihab Nye, Mary Oliver, Langston Hughes, critically acclaimed poets, obviously. But I also love reading the poetry that my colleagues write and share, many of them through the UUA's Skinner House books. I love poetry in songs, in theater, in art. You can find it everywhere around you if you go looking. As for me, I think my place in this world is to help make meaning, to help you make meaning of your experiences individually, to help make meaning of all the disconsolate world, to help all of us make meaning. It's a good thing I'm a minister.